Hello all. Well, we finally reached the final episode of Loki, Season 2, Episode 6. And this episode is called Glorious Purpose, and that's relevant. I didn't mind this episode, and I thought the final payoff was good. I mean, Loki still cries because Loki's cried every episode. There could be an argument made for the fact that he's made to look like a punk again, but I think they hit the landing on this episode, but this episode alone. Did I really want to drag through the previous 5 episodes to reach this? I'm not sure it was really that worth it. Anyway, on to spoilers. I watched this early this morning, so I'm trying to remember it, so if I get some of the stuff slightly out of order, forgive me. At the end of the last episode, Loki learned to time slip, and he slipped back to the point just before Victor went outside. He watches Victor go out, which I was surprised by. I wasn't expecting him to just let him die. And then he goes to speak to Obi and asks him what they could do differently. And Obi's just like, we should have been quicker. So Loki zaps back, tries to rush everything. Tries to rush Victor going outside, but he keeps dying. And every time Loki tries to speed it up, he keeps dying. So he goes back further to the point where Victor was with Renslayer and Miss Minutes, but he keeps dying. And you get this repeated shot of Victor dying over and over again. So you've got a very Groundhog Day element to this. So he decides to go further back. He goes back to where they first introduced Victor to Obi. We get a flashback of the same scene that we saw previously in episode 4, where Obi was explaining the plan and Loki explains the plan. And they're all kind of standing there agog. Loki's next decision, he asks Obi to teach him everything he knows. How long would it take? Centuries. Centuries later, the observation deck gets him kitted up, tells him to run, go as quickly as possible, put it in, shoot it. And this time Victor, in the suit, steps outside and he's not instantly destroyed. And he walks slowly, fighting against the turbulence, till he gets to the MacGuffin machine. He puts the MacGuffin thing in the MacGuffin machine and fires the MacGuffin bolt at the loom. And the loom starts to expand. And it starts to settle as the multiple timelines start being weaved through it. But suddenly something goes wrong. Obi's confused, doesn't know what's happening. Victor's made it back by now. And Loki doesn't understand because they've done it. It's worked. They've expanded the loom. But Victor explains it's a matter of scale because it doesn't matter how big you make the loom. There are an infinite number of choices. Therefore, an infinite number of multiverses. Therefore, the loom will never, ever be big enough. So at this point, Loki realises he's got to go further back. And he goes back to the last episode of the first series with He Who Remains and just stops Sylvie from killing him. And then we get this scene repeated and repeated and repeated with Loki trying to stop Sylvie and Loki getting beaten every time, obviously, because that's what's going to happen. Until finally, Loki turns and speaks to He Who Remains. And instantly He Who Remains freezes Sylvie. And he says to Loki, I'd have thought you'd have discovered how to freeze time by now. So they have a conversation. It turns out the loom was always going to fail. The loom was a failsafe, so that if the multiverse did get created, the loom would destroy the TVA and trim all the excess branches. So there was no way to stop it exploding. It was always going to explode. And it turns out He Who Remains is the one who was making him time slip, or rather gave him that ability, because he needed this to happen to come back to this same point. Loki once again refuses to join him. He Who Remains unfreezes Sylvie, and then Loki just lifts his finger and freezes her again. Because he had learned how to freeze time. More battles, and each time she says, to stop me, you'll have to kill me. And he starts realising that he might have to kill her. He can't figure out what to do, so goes to see Mobius. And it's the moment before Mobius has shown him his history, his fate. And he asks Mobius what he can do, that he's burdened by glorious purpose. A reference to something he said in the first Avengers film. And Mobius replies, that's the problem with glorious purpose, it's a burden. And he tells a story about a hunter who failed because he couldn't do the thing he needed to do. Another hunter did it for him. That other hunter was Renslayer, and the one who failed was him. And it involved killing a 8-year-old boy to sort of save thousands of lives on a branched timeline. So this time he zaps himself forward and he's talking to Sylvie in the second before she was destroyed in episode 5. Just as she's about to be unravelled, Loki turns back time, and she's obviously gobsmacked by this. And she realises what's happening, realises that he's going to have to kill her and save He Who Remains because that's the only way to solve the problem. Obviously Loki's crying because Loki's just crying every episode. Loki then goes back to the moment before Victor goes outside. He turns, looks at his friends, and I didn't know where this was going. And then he goes down the steps and locks the door behind him, opens the door and just walks out. And this is quite a nice bit. This is really quite nicely done, this whole section now. He's striding out there with this time radiation hitting him. And as he's walking, his clothes start to shred, but then you realise underneath, he is Loki. He becomes Loki. He gets his thorn crown. It's not like it used to look in the Avengers. It's a different looking thing. And he destroys the loom. All the timelines suddenly reveal themselves like a web. And he starts grabbing them. And, it's never really explained what he's doing, but energy flies along them. And then a fissure opens. And he starts walking forwards, stepping on steps that aren't there. All the timelines start converging on him. He walks through the fissure into the end of time. Instantly all the timelines disappear, and then Loki continues to walk up the stairs towards what's left of the citadel of He Who Remains, pulling all these timelines behind him. He flips around and flips the timelines around, and he sits down, and his green energy is flying around him. The camera pans back and you see the timelines all swirling and twirling together and forming Yggdrasil, the world tree. And I really like that. I thought that was cool. I thought that whole section was really nice. I thought that was quite a clever and impactful moment. Loki has found his purpose, if you like. And it is kind of to be a god, because following the conversation with Sylvie, she was talking about how even if you have the single timeline, the world is and what he wanted to do and what he was doing, or the purpose of it, was to create a better world for everybody. Kind of a turnaround, really. He started off wanting to rule and ended up kind of ruling, but becoming benevolent. A benevolent god. There's a few wrap-up scenes after that, moments. There's a new council. All that was ho-hum. Obi opens a box with the TVA manual, volume 2. Victor never gets the book. And it turns out the end of time was actually the TVA, and Renslayer, who landed there after being pruned, is devoured by the purple cloud dog. Mobius decides he wants to go and see what his life would have been, and you see back to that family again, him with the 2 boys. Sylvie turns up and they have a bit of an exchange. It's all fine. And then it closes by zooming in on Loki's face as he sits at the centre of the world tree. I thought it was a weird expression that he had. I didn't get the expression he was trying to get, but hey-ho. And that's where it ended. No post-credit scene, which I was expecting. I was not necessarily something to tease something else, just something else. It just felt a little unfinished. And I don't know why it was finished, but it just felt a bit unfinished. It felt like it needed something extra. But yeah, the payoff, the arc of Loki becoming the benevolent god who endows free will, was an interesting one given where he started. But it felt very much like that could have been a one and done. And you could argue that everything that happened before had to lead to that point, but it didn't really feel necessary. There was a lot of filler. I think it would have been great if they'd just done it as a Groundhog Day. Yes, you could do it as a second series to the first series, because you've got to have the first series to understand why this is happening. But this feels more like it would have been better as a film with all the fluff taken out. Because the core of this story all takes place in the final episode. The last few minutes are the payoff. That could have been the whole series. Could have been him doing that groundhog moment and learning that way. And everything that came before could have been massively compressed. Still, I did like that end. I say Loki getting beaten by Sylvie over and over and over again, especially given the power he had by this point and the knowledge he had by this point. Kind of seems a bit stupid, but they needed it for the narrative. Plus it's Loki, he's got to be made to look like an idiot at some point in the programme. And I guess he was trying to persuade her to stop, rather than having to stop her and potentially killing her. Anyway, I'll leave that one there. I'm not sure I'd recommend it. A lot of fluff, a lot of walking down corridors, a lot of talking about feelings, a lot of Loki crying. So what did you think to the final episode? Did you think it hit the landing, or did you feel like it was just another lacklustre episode? Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for listening. Peace out.